We have come to Lesson 33 and the diagram for Ezra and Nehemiah. Don't let this diagram dismay you. We will take it in parts, and I think it may help you understand these two books in the Bible. We start with the great country of Persia. Actually, we know it now as Iran. The name comes from Aryan, A-Y-R-A-N, because it was the Indo-European Aryans who now rule the world after the Semites have gradually lost control. Babylon was the last Semitic empire. But we have the Persians now, which, as I say, is nowadays known as Iran, coming off of the fringes of the eastern steppes that are now Russia, just nomadic wanderers, just as the Hebrews had been around the Arabian desert. And they have now coalesced into two groups of peoples, the Medes and the Persians. The Persians have eventually assimilated the Medes, conquering them, and we have the rise of this great Persian king, Cyrus. What is the religion of these people? It's quite different from the Semites. Of course, the Jews stand alone among the Semites with a revealed religion. This is not a revealed religion, but it is a spiritual religion, a whole step up above the idols and the types of gods known by the rest of the Semites. Zoroaster was their prophet, and he took the old fire gods of fire was worshipped in this area and developed a spiritual religion with Ahar Mazda and Ahriman as the two chief spiritual entities. Mazda, of course we know it as a light bulb now, was indeed the god of light, and Ahriman was the god of darkness. We would know him as the devil. And it was up to the human being which of these two he followed, which of these two he lived out in his life. Was it light or darkness? A very large step forward, which gave Cyrus a different approach as king. He was somewhat, at least, maybe not in our terms, humane. And his army was lightly clad with bow and arrow and a light shield, and could travel very rapidly, and no longer depended on any old heavy mechanized stuff like a chariot. And he was extremely successful, therefore, in war. His arrows met their mark. That was the military part of his success. And the government that he set up was fair. It was well organized. It brought a great many benefits to humankind. There were now good roads. There was even a postal system. And the satraps that he set up governed wisely for the most part. So it was a change for the better. The language is very interesting, that the old Semitic language of Babylon, which was cuneiform but spoken as Aramaic, is now the business language of Persia. And Aramaic will now be spoken throughout the realm. Hebrew will no longer be spoken except by the priests in Jerusalem. There is a monument that Cyrus had made in Iran that compared three of these ancient languages and was the way that they broke the code and began to understand cuneiform, because there was Old Persian, cuneiform, and another language there that Rawlings in the 1800s deciphered. It was a great breakthrough. Then these kings came along with, of course, Cyrus, the one that we're looking at. And as the years progressed, of course, his successors came along. Darius, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, Darius II, and Artaxerxes II, and Artaxerxes III. Well, you can see that when the editors of the materials that were gathered from Ezra and Nehemiah were put together, they did not always understand the history, and when they saw these names were confused as to which and when this particular king was mentioned, and as a result we have a mix-up in the order of Ezra and Nehemiah. And there, up in the corner, you have a box that tells you the chronological sequence of the text, because the text itself is not in sequence. It's been misunderstood which Artaxerxes was being spoken of or written of, and therefore the order got scrambled. It doesn't make a lot of sense the way it is until we decipher it. So now we have a consecutive order of Persian kings who will very much affect the progress made in Jerusalem. We go back to the last lesson when the exiles were optimistically gathering to go back home because the edict of Cyrus has set them free. They have great hopes. They are going back to rebuild. But unfortunately, when they get there, things are not as well in hand as they had imagined. When Babylon destroyed the city of Jerusalem and the temple, it burned it. Burnt limestone is no better than some kind of crumbly substance that can no longer stand as a stone. So they had imagined rebuilding with the wonderful stonework that had been there before, but instead all they have is something like crumbly plaster. So that's the first great disappointment. And before we go on to see how those disappointments were overcome, I want to draw your attention to, first of all, the outside timeline that you have had some experience with before. Coming down along the left, making the bend, and I only want to draw your attention to the center, to David's kingdom. That was in 1000. Now, as you continue that line, you come to 587, 539, and 398. But we're going to expand those years so that we can tell what happened in those sequences. And that's where the dotted lines come in. Take the dotted line from 587 and go up to the left, and you'll see another line that is going to amplify that little time period down there. And there, sure enough, at 587 you have the fall of Jerusalem. Then you have underneath a bracket that takes you through the exile to 539, about 50 years. Jeremiah had told them it would be 70 years, so he's a little off there. But at 539, along comes this marvelous, unexpected edict of Cyrus, which was certainly the hand of the Lord given to his people, unforeseen and certainly mysteriously wonderful. There we have 539. The exile is over. From then on, we have a period of time to 521, almost, what would you say, 100 years, before an altar is built. How could that be? Well, there isn't that long, is there? It's more like 30 to 40 years. That makes more sense. All right, 30 to 40 years, but it's taken that long for them to even put up an altar so that the priests can make sacrifice. And there is no temple. It takes till 516 for the temple to begin to be built. At first, there's some rejoicing when the foundations are laid, but when the old folks look at it, they say, "Oh, this is going to be pitiful. This cannot begin to replace the wonderful Solomonic temple." So, though a temple is finally accomplished, there's going to be 70 more years before there are any walls around Jerusalem to protect it from marauders, from those who hate the Jews who have come back, and we're going to look at that particular mess, and before there is any kind of protection. And so we're going to see 70 years there of malaise. That's just a loss of spirit, discouragement. How can they ever do what they had hoped of doing when they came back? Because they came back with such high spirits, they also came back with a scroll of Ezekiel that showed them what a wonderful temple it could be. And he had instilled in them that they were going to be people of the law. They were going to be obedient. And they were going to reestablish a messianic age. Because after all, they came back with a son, a great-grandson, of David. His name was Sheshbazzar. He came and went. Nothing much occurred. But his son or grandson, I guess maybe it's probably more like a nephew, Zerubbabel, still a son of David, took over, and with him a priest named Jeshua. Now with these two, hope is rekindled, and it's because of their efforts that that altar is finally built. You see their names up there above the line. Zerubbabel and Jeshua. Well, have you ever heard of those names in the sequence that comes up to the son of David that we're looking for? Hardly. They didn't seem to make a dent. So all along we have to have prophets to encourage. We have Obadiah, if you'll see those are in capital letters on their sides up above the line, Obadiah, Haggai and Zechariah. We'll find out how they kept trying to stimulate the people to get that temple done. And then there is, at the end, Malachi. He's the last of the prophets of the Old Testament. But even more important is this man, Nehemiah, who we'll look at closely. And then at the end of the period, Ezra, coming in at 398. Well, that's all very well and good, but what is happening up above here? Well, when those dear people come back from exile, what do they find? They find people have taken over the land. Edom, that was a very barren, red rock type of place. Edom has moved into nicer properties, vineyards, nice orchards, more lush growing for agriculture. That was not their land, but there they are. And those Samaritans, you know now that they are not true Jews. They have mixed blood. Whatever they call religion, it's certainly not the pure Mosaic law. They are very suspicious. They are very suspicious of these people who have come back from exile. And they're going to do everything they can to thwart any rebuilding of that temple. So now you see why there are lines like arrows coming down from the Edomites, coming down from the Samaritans, and coming down from the Ammonites. They have been traditional enemies. They're on the east side of the Jordan. David had battles with them. They were always in his hair and in everybody else's as far as Jerusalem went. So what are they doing trying to gain control here in Jerusalem? But they are. Well, they're going to try to stop the work. If they are not if they're not agreeable as people to the Jews, well, the Jews aren't agreeable for them. And they are going to start writing letters back to the kings complaining about what's going on in Jerusalem. And that's where these arrows come. Darius the First, he hears from them, but he says, go ahead with the building. After all, we have Cyrus's edict. They are supposed to build the temple, and we're supposed to help. But then we have the Samaritans complaining to Xerxes. And Xerxes is not unaware that, yes, it's true what the Samaritans are telling him. Jerusalem has been a thorn in the flesh of its rulers every now and then. So he says they will stop building. The Samaritans have gained ground. Xerxes is going to stop their building. And more complaints are sent off to Xerxes by the Ammonites. And more are sent to Artaxerxes. But Artaxerxes at first says, stop building. You can't build any further in Jerusalem. You're a troublesome people. Only to have his servant, Nehemiah, go into him one day. He's a cupbearer. And Artaxerxes notes that he is crestfallen because he has heard that Jerusalem has no walls, no gates, that it is nothing more still than a ruin. Even the temple has nothing to guard it from the predations of people around it. And so Artaxerxes says to Nehemiah, what's the matter? And very fearfully, because actually these kings have ultimate word. Whatever they say goes, and if they say death to him, it's death to him. But Nehemiah is courageous, and he tells Artaxerxes why he is sorrowing. And Artaxerxes, bless his soul, says to Nehemiah, go back and build, and I will aid you with finances, and you will have some power there to do what you want to do. So there we have, in 445, Nehemiah back in Jerusalem with power. And he begins to rebuild the walls, only to have these people up here, especially the Samaritans and an Ammonite, attempt to thwart him in every possible way. And you read that throughout your lesson. Finally, the people who are just families, taking different sections of the wall, it must have been a very interesting picture of these families putting back up the rocks and the stones to build a wall. And it was rather precarious, I guess, when it was finished, because its enemies laughed and said, well, even a fox on that wall would break it down, because they didn't have the great ashlars that they had hoped. They did have to use bits and pieces, but they did it anyway, and they got those walls up because Nehemiah gave them the heart to do it. They had weapons in one hand and working tools in the other, and eventually the walls are up, and Nehemiah's task seems to be ended. He does cause the people to reconsider their dedication to the law, because he is a legalist. He wants the Mosaic law to be enforced. That's one of the reasons he wanted those walls and gates, was to keep out people on the Sabbath. So he asks them to rededicate themselves in the covenant. He's a good man, and he works there for many years. However, he does not ask what Ezra will ask. And Ezra is the last part of this reconstruction story, begun with the Edict of Cyrus, but so slowly coming to any kind of conclusion that will make the Jews feel that they are actually the people of God, that they are part of a plan, and it has taken many years for them to come and regain their confidence. But when Ezra comes, and he is sent by Artaxerxes II, he is also sent back with some of the golden utensils that had been taken by Babylon, and also treasures, other treasures that are to go back to the temple. But when he gets there, what does he see? Oh, he is so appalled. It actually says he tears his clothing and he pulls out his hair. What is appalling him? The foreign wives that the Jewish men have taken since they've been back. Now they went back. They were chosen to go back because they had the right genealogy. You remember that? Very important that they be part of the children of Jacob, one of the 10 tribes. And here they are marrying these attractive women of the locale that are not pure Jews by any stretch of the imagination. More likely, they are mixed blood people. They may have been very attractive. In fact, we'll find that Malachi is saying that they divorced their Jewish wives in order to marry them. That's a very key understanding for us. Otherwise, it looks as though this is sheer cruelty on the part of Ezra, because he says, well, first of all, he fasted, and he fell on his knees and prayed, and he's so ashamed before God for the iniquity of these people. They are the remnant, and God has been good to them through the Persians. But they are contaminating everything because they have intermarried, and they are not upholding the law of Moses. So, Ezra gathers a great assembly, and he is proposing a covenant, but they must put away their foreign wives and their children. Now, this is far beyond Nehemiah's time, but you remember that Nehemiah himself was so offended to find that the children of these people couldn't speak Hebrew, that they were illiterate about the covenant and about the law, that he had actually thrashed a few of them. So this was not a new thing, that Ezra was so uncomfortable about their having these foreign women and children who don't speak Hebrew. Now he fasts all night and prays, and he mourns over their faithlessness, and he assembles as many as he can in Jerusalem in a heavy rain. He says they're not going to work for this day, and by the end of the time, because he reads the law to them all day, from morning until midday, He teaches them the law, and the people grieve, and Ezra says, don't grieve, celebrate. This is going to be a good time for you, because you're going to separate from all foreigners. And they cry with a loud voice, but they put away their wives and children. It's quite a story, and when we look at it, we think, how can this be, this act? What would have happened had it not been? What if Ezra had not asked for that, or demanded that? What if he had not recovenanted them to the laws of Moses? What if he had not cared about it, or thought that it was cruel? Would you have the Catholic faith today? How could it be? For this time it was an essential that the people recommit themselves to the law of Moses, determined to live a legalistic life, pull those gates and walls around them, and keep out foreign influence, so that the faith of God, the revelation of God, through His holy prophets, can come to fulfillment. It's all very good to reach your hand out in friendship to people, but you only do that when you have a firm grounding under you of what you believe and what you will never let go of, or the friendship will turn into mush, and there will be no furtherance of God's ways.